Jocelyn, welcome to the stage. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Perrin. It's a pleasure to be here, and you can keep me away, so thank you. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nation tribes of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. It is great to be here. Like I said, I couldn't stay away. And I hear that next year is in Halifax. You won't keep me away from there either. I hope the Port of Halifax will have me and show me around. Our vision at the Port of Vancouver is to be the world's most sustainable port, and our mission is to enable Canada's trade objectives, ensuring safety, environmental protection, and consideration for local communities. In overseeing the port's long-term success and sustainability, the Port Authority fulfills a vital role for Canada's economy. The Port of Vancouver is nearly the same size as the next 5 largest Canadian ports combined when it comes to the amount of cargo handled. We can handle the most diverse range of cargo of any port in North America, and this is a competitive advantage for Canadians. While it's almost 1,000 kilometers from where we are today to the port, our host city of Calgary is deeply linked to the port by trade, as are many of your communities. It is a privilege for us to support businesses and communities across the country, such as those here in Alberta, that relied on the port to ship out 30 million metric tons of cargo last year with an economic value of $48 billion. As the country's gateway to 170 countries around the world and handling 1 of every $3 of Canada's trade in goods outside of North America, activities at the port have a ripple effect across the country, as you well know, helping to sustain over 115,000 jobs, $7 billion in wages, and nearly $12 billion in GDP. And I will tell anyone this, I have the best job at the Port of Vancouver, at the Port Authority. I get to meet with my chamber friends on a regular basis. And for those that don't know, I'm vice chair of the Surrey Board of Trade, so I am very much personally invested as well. Thank you. I love to learn about the amazing work that you're doing to build better business environments and therefore better communities. The Port Authority is a proud member of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and many local chambers of commerce and boards of trade. I thank you all for the incredible work that you do, and I hope to meet many more of you over the next couple of days. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce your keynote speaker. Minister Anand was first elected as a member of Parliament for Oakville in 2019. She has previously served as Minister of National Defense, as Perrin mentioned, and as Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Minister Anand assumed the Treasury portfolio in July of this year. Minister Anand will provide remarks, followed by a fireside chat with Perrin Beatty. The session is an opportunity for chamber members to hear from a member of the government's economic team. Please help me in welcoming Minister Anand.
Well, thank you so much, Jocelyn, and Perrin, really thank you so much for inviting me here today. Bonjour tout le monde. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. I told my team I was going to say, good morning, Calgary. So that's for all of you. Good morning. I'm so excited to be here with you today. And especially given that the title is Energizing Canada's Future. And I figure we really need to ensure that we have this conversation with energy, which is so central to everything we're doing. I wanted to start today by talking a little bit about my personal journey, and you'll see how this ties into a discussion about what I'm doing at Treasury Board and what we are doing as a Government of Canada in the area of economic policy. So I was born in Kemptville, Nova Scotia. My parents, ils sont des amis immigrants de Nouvelle-Écosse in the 1960s, and there were very few South Asian families in Nova Scotia at the time. But how many people are from Nova Scotia here, by the way? Where are the people from Nova Scotia? Great, perfect. So it didn't matter that my parents didn't look like anybody else in the community, really, or that we didn't, because Nova Scotians welcomed our family with open arms. They were incredibly giving and welcoming, and we didn't lock our doors at night. We ate dinner at our neighbor's house, and my parents basically worked all day. And I say that because that's what community is, and that's what is replicated in towns and cities across this country. Many of those towns and cities are represented here at this incredible gathering of chambers of commerce across this country. And I'll say that the idea of community is at the very heart of what I do every day at Treasury Board, and the way I think about policy, the way I think about what we need to do. Because in Kemptville, Nova Scotia, where I was born and raised, when we were growing up, the owner of the drugstore, McDougall's, or where we got our school supplies, Chisholm's, or where we got our sports stuff at Cleve's Sporting Goods, or where my dad got his clothes at Finney's, these were all family-run businesses, and the kids of the parents of those businesses went to school with us, Kings County Academy. And I learned at a very early age that it does take a village to build a community, and that communities across this country are looking out for each other. Now, flash forward to 2019, and I had taught law at the University of Toronto and other universities for almost 25 years. I practiced corporate and securities law, focused on small and medium-sized enterprises in that job, and the life of SMEs, how SMEs are raising capital. Those types of issues were very central to my work. And I was asked to run for office, and as one would, I politely declined a few times. And then I said, well, why not? And a number of people told me, well, a racialized woman will not win in Oakville, Ontario. But I knew from my upbringing that small towns are supportive, and that I may well have support in Oakville. And I just wanted to test the hypothesis as to whether I would win or not. And so as I went through that process and did win, and the Prime Minister then did ask me to be the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, I was surprised. And I ran home to find out what public services and procurement meant, as you would. Canada Post, Receiver General of Canada, but not on that list was the COVID-19 pandemic and procuring PPE, et cetera. But I'll just say that I learned then what we need to do as a government, which is to pivot and to be resilient. And many people look at our government during that time and say, how did they do that? By July 2021, we were the most vaccinated country in the G20. We had procured vaccines, PPE, and rapid tests. And even though I was facing a lot of criticism during that procurement, I knew that we were going to be successful because I knew the schedule and I was dogged with the vaccine suppliers. All that to say that that was a pivot for our government to support businesses and students and seniors during that time, as well as to procure much needed PPE and vaccines. And then the Prime Minister, as Perrin mentioned, appointed me to be at Defense, and there was another pivot. That was in terms of gathering aid for Ukraine, military aid for Ukraine. And Perrin, I miss the forces as well. I am so touched by your remarks because the feeling is mutual, and I miss that role. But I'm equally excited to be able to lead the Treasury Board during this economic time when we are facing high inflation and high interest rates, relatively speaking. There is the question that all of you are facing and your members are facing as well as to how we as a government can do better for Canada and the Canadian economy. And so since July 26th, when I was sworn in as president of the Treasury Board, I've been traveling across the country. Et je vais vous visiter aussi. I'm going to visit you also. Halifax, Collingwood, Oakville, Winnipeg, Vancouver, and I'm coming to see you because I want to hear from you. Just as when I was in defense, I wanted to hear from the forces themselves. And let me tell you a little bit about what we are doing at Treasury Board. Premièrement, nous devons continuer d'appuyer notre population canadienne et aussi les contribuables. What I say to my team every day, and this isn't just at Treasury Board, but throughout my last few years in government, would the Canadian taxpayer agree that this was a good measure for our country? And that means sometimes I say to my team in the Department of Public Servants, let's go back and look at that contract. Do we have clauses in the contract which allow the federal government to leverage their position in times of difficulty? Those are the types of cost-benefit analysis that I bring to the roles that I am in, and including Treasury Board. And so at Treasury Board, when I was appointed, almost the next week, I said, well, we need to launch a spending review. That was an obligation in Budget 2023, but immediately I sent a letter to my colleagues and said, we need to find savings in your budgets. Areas where money isn't being utilized for the purposes of Canadians. Are we spending too much on executive travel and outsourcing, for example? Let's find, I said, $15 billion of savings in 5 years and $4 billion every year thereafter. And let's focus those savings sur les objectifs canadiens, sur le soin de santé, sur l'environnement vert, sur l'abordabilité avec le logement, housing, the green economy, healthcare. And so I'll be tabling the results of this review in this fall's supplementary estimates and every estimates process throughout the next following years. But let's be clear, we have an obligation to work for the Canadian taxpayer, and that's exactly what I want to do. Also at Treasury Board, we have a bill at second reading before the House of Commons, Bill S6. And what Bill S6 does is to make sure that we are addressing some of the barriers to competition. The Act's name is an Act Respecting Regulatory Modernization. So it is going to ensure that we have digital ambition. It's going to ensure that in some areas, we are reducing the barriers to competition, reducing red tape. And so that is something that is very important to my work as well at Treasury Board. I mentioned digital ambition. Many people criticize the federal government for not being as efficient as we could be. And that's exactly what we are working on every single day, making sure that we are building digitized systems. So at Treasury Board, I have a chief information officer that reports directly to me on these issues. I'm working with Terry Beach to make sure that our systems are modernized and digitized. And then on the green economy at Treasury Board also, we are working to make sure that we reduce our emissions the federal government, so that we reach net zero by 2050. We've already reduced emissions by 40% in terms of our buildings and our fleet, vehicle fleet. So that is something we're working on as well. Now, throughout all of this work, I'll just say that the key has to be on efficiency of process and purpose. And I will say, at the same time, our broader government strategy is to support Canadians across the board. And you saw that during the pandemic, the CEBA loan, which we all know, and you all know very well, but also other supports that we put in place during the pandemic. And those supports allow a foundation to exist in our economy where people can go to work. $10 a day childcare, the Canada Child Benefit are some examples there. And then on the broader economic policy front, as part of the government's economic team, of course, we have to pivot as well. On affordable housing, you've seen us recently remove the GST altogether on purpose-built rentals to ensure that we're unlocking supply in the housing sector. You've seen us also, in terms of the green economy, investing in EV battery plants, Ford, Stellantis, Volkswagen, Northvolt in Quebec. Ce sont des investissements cruciaux pour l'environnement, pour les changements climatiques. And Canada is going to become a world-leading supplier in EV batteries as a result of these investments. And then you see us also on natural resources, developing a list of critical minerals that will form the basis of our critical mineral strategy, and investing in that area of our economy so that Canada becomes a supplier of choice for critical minerals, including lithium, which is so central to battery production. So with all of that, I'd like to say that there are continued lessons to be learned in terms of how we can improve. And it is really in that spirit that I am here today. I know that we have to continue to build an economy that works for everyone. And in a country like Canada, so geographically diverse and multicultural, in a time of high inflation and high interest rates, we need to listen, and then we need to pivot and respond. So avec ça, ce sont des mots cruciaux pour moi de dire aujourd'hui. And I'd like to end really where I began, which is small town Nova Scotia. I'm here because of the lessons that I learned as a child and then as a young adult in various towns and cities across the country, that you are all here in order to improve your own specific communities. And our job at the federal government is to listen and learn and then respond. And someone once said, you know, a small business is an amazing way to have an impact on the world we live in. And I couldn't agree more. All of you are having an impact on your respective communities. And I hope to be able to continue to support you in that work at the Treasury Board of Canada in whatever way I can. So thank you so much.
Well, Minister, thank you very much. Can you hear me? No. Testing 1, 2, 3. Yes. Minister, thank you very much. That was quite a tremendous tour d'horizon of all of your responsibilities that you have. And you
From birth onwards.
Well, you really have hit the ground running. The plan was for the two of us to have a conversation, but the opportunity is too good for delegates across the country to be able to ask their questions and to express their points of view, because you've solicited their thoughts. So I want to invite people to come to the microphone with any questions you might have or comments for the minister. and we'll try to get through as many of them as possible. But let me, just as people are thinking of that, ask you one question, and that is in terms of the regulatory agenda. How will this manifest itself? In what tangible ways will business be able to see their capabilities being unleashed so that we can build the country?
Well, it's a great question because in my remarks, I mentioned Bill S6, the act to modernize and reduce the regulatory burden on Canadians. But let me just dig a little deeper in terms of what that statute will bring forward. It proposes 45 changes to 28 pieces of legislation. So across the board, addressing issues raised by businesses themselves and by Canadians. So things like reducing the burdens on businesses, facilitating digital interactions with government, and making cross-border trade easier. That's all contained in Bill S6, which is at second reading right now in the House of Commons. Also, we are working on regulatory modernization writ large. And in that vein, cooperation among jurisdictions could not be more important for federations in a globalized economy. And so let me give you just one example. The Canada-US Regulatory Cooperation Council is one group that we're working with closely. It's a stakeholder and regulatory forum. It works together to reduce cross-border red tape and foster cross-border investments. That's just one example. But we need to continue to increase the ability of businesses, small and large, to do business cross-border, reducing costs for them, while at the same time maintaining the health and the safety and the security of our citizens. So those are just two examples, Perrin, of the types of things that we are doing to reduce red tape. I read through a lot of the material relating to the Chamber's initiatives over the past years, and I think that's very much aligned with the type of thinking that I'm bringing forward.
Thank you. Todd from Sherwood Park.
Thank you, Perrin. And thank you, Minister, for coming to Alberta. We really appreciate it. And thank you for speaking on behalf of the Canadian Federation. We really appreciate your appearance here, and everything you said today is great. I just want to also say that you had mentioned lithium, and we have a company here called E3 Metals, and they extract lithium out of brine from oil wells. That technology was not included in energy and the environment's definition of mining, and in our policy that we put forward a few years ago. You did that for us, and in doing so, it was a two-part policy where you also, after that, allowed flow-through shares so that this small Calgary-based company could attract investment. And they are now in the ground and producing lithium in their test sites in Alberta here. And I just want to thank you, your government, for doing that, because it means a lot to Alberta. It could mean $80 billion worth of resources for Alberta. So thank you very much.
Well, Todd, thank you very much, because one of the things that I love to hear is the examples of government policy at work, right? At our 50,000 feet level, we don't get to hear often the real life examples of how government policy can help your business and therefore the Canadian economy to succeed. And there are a number, as you mentioned in your question and your comment, of environmentally practicable and also sustainable initiatives, incentives that will allow business to succeed. You highlighted one of them, but that's really an approach that we are taking to marry environmental sustainability with economic development and growth for the betterment of the entire country. And the fact that that's occurring here in Alberta, someplace so central to economic growth in Canada, warms my heart. So thank you for mentioning that.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Minister. A pleasure to hear you speak, especially about small business across Canada. I'm Alison Hawkins. I'm chair of the Advocacy Committee for the Windsor-Essex Regional Chamber of Commerce. But in my day-to-day life, I've built a cloud accounting practice that supports business across Canada. And one of the key things to simplify business for those business owners is access to their information in a way that is easily accessible, especially digitally. So I would love to hear your feedback, perspective on open banking and why it's taking Canada so long to catch up with the rest of the world in terms of data sharing for small business.
Well, thank you so much, Alison. Of course, open banking was a topic that I looked at extensively in my life as a professor, so I hear what you're saying in terms of the timing of the initiative relating to open banking. I agree with you. Transparency and access to information is very important across sectors, not only in government, but obviously throughout the private sector, and banking is no exception. But in terms of the actual timeline, I would be remiss if I tried to guess right now what is happening in terms of the finance department's itinerary. So I have my team here, and we will take that back, and we'll get your contact information in Windsor and get back to you with a specific response.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison.
Another question.
Good morning, Minister Rakesh Naidu from Windsor Essex Regional Chamber of Commerce. First of all, thank you to your own government for the investment that you're making in the EV supply chain. Windsor is a beneficiary of that with the Stellantis LG plant. So thank you for that. What we are seeing is that there's a great deal of interest in the sector. However, a lot of OEMs have complained or have been disappointed because there isn't really enough uptake of EV vehicles. And partly it's got to do with infrastructure or lack of infrastructure when it comes to charging. Can you talk a bit about what the government is doing to invest more on the infrastructure side?
Most definitely. Thank you for the question. Of course, Stellantis, obviously extremely important in our mission to ensure that we are creating a hub, a supply chain hub for EV batteries in this country. Just to put your question in context, I just want to mention, and you may know these stats already, but we expect the EV supply chain that we're creating in Canada to yield about 250,000 jobs by 2030 and add about $48 billion to our economy. And so your point is especially important, especially when we see the increase in EV battery sales, EV car sales, generally speaking, which have increased since 2021 by 240%. So along with EV vehicles, we also need charging stations. I personally, we have 2 vehicles ourselves, and trying to get them both charged with one charger is a microcosm of the problem you are exemplifying in your question. So we have been building the infrastructure, contributing to the charging station infrastructure across the country. But with stats like 240% increase in electric vehicle sales since 2021, we're not necessarily meeting the demand where it's at. So what we have to do is to continue with infrastructure investments in local communities. In my community of Oakville, you drive down Lakeshore Road, you are going to see charging stations. You will see them at businesses who are implementing them on their own, as well as other places like bus stations. We have electric buses as well that we are supporting across the country. But what you're highlighting is across the country, if we expect to become a country that is using and reliant on the EV batteries that we're producing, we need the infrastructure to go along with it. And I know that my colleagues, Minister Guilbeault and Wilkinson, are working very diligently on ensuring that that infrastructure remains in place.
Thank you.
I think it's Bruce from Victoria back there at mic 5.
Yes, hi, it's Bruce from Victoria, Greater Victoria Chamber. Minister, thank you for your time. I wanted to go back and talk about housing for a moment, if I could, which you mentioned off the top. So 2 particular things to create the ability to free up workforce housing within any general economy or any community. One would be housing at military bases. We have CFB Esquimalt in Greater Victoria, which has a personnel number of 6,500, and less than 10% of those people actually live on the base. So creating housing on the base would be a means of attraction and retention of personnel for military, which is a big issue. They have nothing but room. There's tons of, you've been there, you know that. And by freeing up those houses in the general housing market, that would mean workforce housing would be available for people as those people live on the base instead. And another one, which isn't directly within your purview, but could be, is housing on post-secondary campuses. If more students were living on campus, that creates a sense of community. It lessens the carbon footprint of them going to and from where they are, and again, frees up housing that could be used for general workforce housing. One little nerdy point on that, post-secondaries are of course the purview of the province, but the federal government has the ability to back that up. Post-secondaries at the university level in BC are allowed to incur debt in order to create housing. Community colleges are not. So for that reason, in Greater Victoria, Camosun College has 0 on-campus housing for their 20,000 students. So I'll put those points out there to create housing in those both places to create and free up workforce housing in general. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Bruce. I really appreciate the question. And of course, housing on bases is very much top of mind, I know, for the Chief of Defense Staff and for Minister Blair. While I was in that portfolio, you're right, one of the things we were looking to address was the cost of living issues that armed forces members face by the very nature of their work, which is transitioning from base to base and place to place. And so we have made amendments to the way in which armed forces members are paid, which hopefully will go some way to alleviating the cost of living issues. And on housing, I know from visiting bases across the country that we are making the changes that hopefully will be useful to address housing issues, which are prevalent in Esquimalt, but also in other bases across the country. Borden comes to mind. In terms of the affordable housing for students and others, you're right. We need to be working very closely with the provincial government and, in fact, municipalities that are in charge of permitting, for example, in the building of affordable housing. I know there's some innovation that is occurring in that area, especially as I speak with builders, even in my local community, about what they are doing for and with universities in the building of that type of affordable housing. What we can do at the federal government, however, is to work with these different stakeholders to ensure that construction companies, for example, and other stakeholders have the tools they need. So, for example, removing the GST on purpose-built rentals unlocking supply. We've heard from builders across the country since that initiative was launched in the summer that, they're building 3,000 more units, other places 5,000 more units, and we expect that to have a significant effect on the supply of housing in the medium to long term. The housing crisis, however, is real, and it's now. And so I know that Minister Sean Fraser is working very closely with mayors across the country to partner with them in terms of unlocking federal money for municipalities to be able to build. We have a $4 billion rapid housing initiative and a $70 billion housing accelerator fund. And Sean Fraser is very busy across the country making sure that money starts flowing as quickly as possible. You would have seen the Prime Minister's announcement in London for affordable housing, $70 million with the City of London. That's just one example of the way in which we need to partner, because as you say, there's constitutional questions here, and we need to make sure we're all working together to get housing built as soon as possible. Thank you.
Question at microphone 3.
Thank you, Perrin, and thank you, Minister, for being here. I'm Corey Ruttercup, the CEO of the Greater Langley Chamber of Commerce, and you mentioned it in your comment, so I just wanted to pick up on that and ask if you can share the rationale, the thinking on CEBA from your government. I've got 1,000 members, 92% of which supported an actual extension on the forgivable portion. Even those that have already paid it back know that it was an important thing to do for those who hadn't paid it back. 21% have no plans to pay it back in time on January 18th. So can you think of the rationale and why your government, this is the hill we chose to die on, this is the one thing we can't do anything about, and why your government chose not to extend the deadline that we are actually concerned about, the repayable one?
Okay, thank you so much.
John Charest used to always say, the question you've got to watch out for is the last one.
Well, I just want to back up a bit and say that the federal government has provided more than $49 billion in liquidity for over 898,000 businesses. So at the beginning of the pandemic, it was very clear to us that we needed to support small business, and we did that, which your question didn't quite mention. I will say that in the extension of the CEBA loan to the middle of January and then to the end of March, if it's refinanced with a bank, that is with the repayment of the rebate of the $20,000. But the repayment itself is extended to the end of 2026, though without the $20,000. And so I take the spirit of your question, however, that, businesses are still hurting. I'd like to say that I hear that, and I have said that many times, which is we supported businesses at the beginning of the pandemic from going bankrupt, and we need to continue to make sure we are there for them now. And so there is a line, however, as you were saying, there is a balance that we need to strike at the Government of Canada, which is, we are no different from households across the country where we are trying to make sure we are watching the public purse itself. And so this was very much a compromise initiative between providing full-scale support and building on the support that we've already provided and trying to support small business going forward. But I will say one more thing, which is the extension to the CEBA loan came after advocacy by many people in this room, including my own hometown of Oakville, Ontario. And it showed to me the power of the chamber, actually, the advocacy and the work of your chambers every single day came across the desks of almost every parliamentarian I know. And I will just say that that advocacy was extremely powerful. I'm still in touch with people in different sectors, for example, in the restaurant sector, about how restaurants themselves are faring as a result of this particular extension. In the travel industry, how you are addressing those types of initiatives from the government, which don't go the full way, but go part of the way. And I'm actually still waiting for some of that data to come in, but I definitely hear you that this is not the ideal scenario that you wanted, and some of your members wanted, but at the end of the day, it was a decision relating to balancing competing spends that we have at the federal government.
And Minister, unfortunately, that was the last question. I'm getting high signs from my staff, from whom I take my marching orders, saying that we need to wrap up. But that was an important question. Thank you very much for that, and for the other questions that we received. With that, let me invite the president and CEO of your local chamber, France Fournier, from the Oakville Chamber of Commerce, to thank you.
C'est un honneur d'être ici aujourd'hui, ministre. Je vous remercie beaucoup pour votre présentation et discussion avec Perrin et la communauté aujourd'hui. I want to thank you again, Minister, for your insightful comments. Reducing red tape is music to our ears in this room. It is something that the Canadian Chamber and chambers across the country have been advocating for. And so I encourage you to continue down that path. I will tell you, from the moment Minister Anand was elected as MP for Oakville, she has been a strong advocate for our business community. Minister of Public Service and Procurement, Minister of National Defense, and now President of the Treasury Board, Minister Anand has remained accessible and interested in our local business. From the pandemic to traveling from across the world, Minister Anand always made time for our chamber. And she would kindly ask, do you have time for a chat today? And I would smile and say, yes, I do. And so she would ask, what are you hearing? What are the pain points? What do I need to know? And I'll share with you a very quick story that illustrates her deep commitment to her community. While at Defense, we were scheduled to host a breakfast, and 2 days before the sold-out event, she called me and said that circumstances had arisen that she may not be able to make the breakfast. And so we discussed the pros and cons of canceling and rescheduling, with me emphasizing that we could absolutely cancel and reschedule. My phone rang a few minutes later, and she said to me, walk me through this event, minute by minute. I made a commitment to be there, and I will be there. And she was. Minister, thank you for joining us today. Before you are a group of individuals who are committed to supporting our business communities. Over the next 2 days, we will gather to discuss the economic and political issues affecting the prosperity of Canadian businesses and set our policy agenda for the year. The minister has said that she is traveling to visit chambers of commerce from across the country. So my colleagues, I will say to you, get ready for that call. What are you hearing? What are the pain points? And what do I need to do? Thank you, Minister. This concludes our session. We're going to take a 30-minute health break, and we will reconvene in this room at noon for lunch and another presentation. Thank you.